The High Court will hear an application to interdict the planned VAT increase. This legal challenge, brought forward by the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters, aims to halt the implementation of the tax hike, which is a key component to the 2025 fiscal framework. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has responded with an affidavit arguing that the application lacks merit. We are now joined by EFF spokesperson Sinawo Thambo to get their perspective on this crucial issue. A very good morning to you, Sinawo, and thank you so much for making time for us this morning. What's going through your mind this morning as that May 1st deadline is looming, or the date in which that VAT increase is set to take effect, considering also on the other end, politically speaking, there are these so-called conversations that have been taking place amongst the members of the Government of National Unity and those outside the GNU to try and see if they can find an alternative?
Morning, Aldrin, and morning to your viewers. I think what's going through my mind is that the people of South Africa have been dealt a great injustice. And over the past few weeks, there's been a lot of political parties, a lot of political leaders who've been desperately trying to explain their decision to vote for the fiscal framework and revenue proposals, which contain the VAT hikes as they stand. And they've been trying to spin and maneuver South Africans. It began with celebrations after the adoption of the fiscal framework in the National Assembly, people cheering and clapping hands for a 0.5% VAT hike that is going to disproportionately affect the poor and the middle class. And the pronouncements were that they have scrapped the VAT hikes, they've achieved a fiscal victory. And as weeks have gone by, people have been backtracking and twisting and swerving, and ultimately are now speaking about possibly the VAT being scrapped 2 months afterwards and all sorts of things. So I think the people of South Africa have been done a great injustice by the political elite in this country, led by the ANC and accompanied by political parties such as Action SA, Build One South Africa, and Rise Mzansi. So the intervention in the Western Cape High Court by the Economic Freedom Fighters is one that is one of our last resorts to ensure that the process led to the adoption of the fiscal framework is reversed and sent back to the National Assembly and the Standing Committee on Finance, because it was unprocedural in our view. It didn't follow the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Other Related Matters Act. And anything outside of that is just wishful thinking, but also people who are trying to desperately rescue themselves from the mistake they have made. So the negotiations that are occurring outside of the legislative process, which adopted the fiscal framework, are meaningless. Those who have voted for the VAT hike, which was contained in the fiscal framework, must take responsibility, because there's 9 days left now and there's no indication that this VAT hike will be reversed.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it. It is looking at the days that are left before the 1st of May. But Enoch Godongwana, as we've just indicated in our introduction there as well, saying that this application lacks merit. And I know that with your joinder application as the EFF, one of the issues that you are dealing with is the one around the committee meetings that were taking place, and also the adoption of the fiscal framework and how it was procedurally unlawful. Why did the EFF decide not to go and also support the Democratic Alliance on their argument in attacking Section 7, subsection 1 and 4 of the VAT Act, that the Minister of Finance has unilateral power to increase VAT for a period of 12 months?
Look, I think in our court application, we also state that we pray for an interdict of the VAT hike, praying for an outcome from the court as it relates to Part B, which relates to exactly what you're speaking to, which is the VAT Act, where the minister claims to have the unilateral powers to implement a VAT hike outside of a parliamentary process pending 12 months that can be revised or accepted by Parliament. But I think the true test as well, Aldrin, that is part of this process, is to check as to whether the process of the fiscal framework, its adoption in Parliament, and all the other relevant bills, such as the Division of Revenue Bill, the Appropriations Bill, are not tick-boxing exercises, whereas the minister can unilaterally make decisions as critical, such as VAT. Because the fiscal framework, and I saw the minister in his papers argues that the fiscal framework can't reverse what he pronounced in terms of the VAT hike, is the foundational piece of legislation that is the blueprint for all other subsequent legislations. I mean, this morning we'll discuss the Division of Revenue Bill in the Appropriations Committee, which is chaired by Musa Maimane, ironically. And having read the draft report this morning, it seems like he's going to try to use an irrelevant piece of legislation to try to redeem himself. But it be that as it may, it is important for the court to determine whether the process of adopting the fiscal framework is consequential, because if the minister claims that it is inconsequential, then why does Parliament participate in the entire process? in itself, why was the urgency to adopt a fiscal framework which is guided by a VAT hike in terms of revenue generation mechanisms as well? So I think the court is going to make an important distinction for us as to what are the minister's powers as it relates to the VAT Act in relation to the adoption of the fiscal framework, which is adopted by Parliament and guides financial planning for the financial year as well. So I think it's an important test that we're making as to whether we're engaged in meaningless exercises in Parliament or whether there's actually true meaning behind the adoption of the fiscal framework and relevant legislation.
Yeah, and in your papers as well, you actually cite one of the interviews that we had here on the show. This is on the AM report with regards to the fiscal framework, the adoption of the fiscal framework, that meeting that took place, and making reference to what the chairperson of the Financial Fiscal Commission, Dr. Nombeko Mbava, had said, that it's either you adopt or you amend, and from your reading of what took place during that meeting, was either of those done?
No, it was not done in our understanding, and you're completely correct. We cite numerous interviews, including the one you had, which shows the importance of public discourse around the budget that has occurred, which I think has been at its highest levels in the history of our democratic dispensation, and we must thank platforms like this for that. We are of the view that there was not a clear statement in the beginning of the meeting, which is required by the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act, that there must be a clear statement emanating from the Standing Committee on Finance as to whether we seek to adopt the fiscal framework as it stands or we seek to amend it. Now, we argue that that statement was inserted after the fact. So the meeting concluded, it ended, and we were sent a final report via email in the evening, whereas that statement was inserted at the end of the report without that proposition being made to the Standing Committee of Finance. And this is critical because legislation dictates that it is only through the adoption or the amendment of the fiscal framework by the Standing Committee of Finance that the fiscal framework can be amended. So Mose Maimane, who's going to chair this meeting this morning, has been going around saying he's exploring mechanisms as to whether the fiscal framework can be withdrawn or amended post facto, and that is not possible. And this is the delusion that he's existing under, that we're going to need to correct in the Appropriations Committee this morning as well. The opportunity to amend the fiscal framework and ensure that VAT hikes are not part of the revenue generation mechanisms for this financial year was at that Standing Committee of Finance. Parliament had the opportunity to reject the fiscal framework and send it back to the Standing Committee of Finance. If any political party had alternative ideas on how to generate the 28 billion shortfall that now wants to be generated through VAT, they should have done that at that stage. You can't now want to retrospectively seek to amend the fiscal framework by trying to smuggle in recommendations in the appropriations bill or the division of revenue bill, because those bills don't deal with fiscal framework related matters. So all of the scurrying around 30 days negotiations was a collective waste of the South African people's time. These political parties supported the VAT hike as contained in the fiscal framework, and they must take responsibility. There's 9 days left now. All of them are twisting and turning, saying that there can be a reversal of the VAT hikes after 2 months. What happens with the VAT that will be paying over those 2 months? There's a suggestion that there will be rebates. Are you saying to me millions of consumers are going to receive discounts or refunds post facto after purchasing goods with the VAT hikes they've paid? It's ridiculous, it's nonsensical, it's misleading to our people. So we are hopeful that we'll succeed today.
I don't even think that it's possible. I don't know how you do something like that.
It shows you the level of undermining of the intelligence of the people of South Africa, because they've made a mistake, they've made a blunder, and at the center of this blunder is the African National Congress that gave these political parties the impression that they can change something after they've supported it in Parliament. So they say they're going to be meeting this week to continue to explore these mechanisms. I think it's a game that we should not be all be participating in. Let's hope the applications by the EFF and the DA in court are successful today. If they are not, we're going to have to try to continue the fight either on the picket lines or ensure that relative legislation in terms of division of revenue is to the benefit of the people.
Okay, and just quickly in conclusion, Sinawo, considering that you have this conviction that is being shared with the public that alternative revenue is being sought, to amend that fiscal framework and the introduction of a new bill, just quickly take us to what that process would entail. And some people have argued, of course, that it won't be possible to do that under 9 days.
Look, so the fiscal framework, there's one thing we must accept. It's been adopted by the National Assembly. It's set in stone now. And what the Money Bills and Related Matters Act states is that any subsequent legislation must be in line with the fiscal framework. So let's say, for example, now we're dealing with the Division of Revenue Bill this morning in the Appropriations Committee. Whatever we seek to divide, and that speaks to dividing generated revenue across local government, provincial government, and national government. So whatever planning we do in terms of that division of revenue is based part and parcel by revenue generated through the VAT that has been introduced, which is 0.5%. So the fiscal framework is that sort of cornerstone piece of legislation. So there's no amending it, there's no withdrawing it. Anyone who makes those claims must tell us which legislation permits that as well. What we are going to be able to do, or what they purport that they want to do, is to introduce a tax bill, which is only be able to be introduced by the Minister of Finance, which would try to reverse the VAT hike. But we're also curious as to what would be the basis of that taxation bill, what it would be called, and at what stage will it be introduced, and what other form of mechanism of generating revenue would be introduced in its place, and under what timelines. And there's no clarity around that. And if you listen to the Minister of Finance, who was on the Newzroom platform, I think 2 weeks ago as well, he throws the ball back into Parliament's court, and rightfully so, by saying it's Parliament's duty to present alternative mechanisms of generating revenue and to amend the fiscal framework. And he says that after it has been adopted, knowing very well that he's been toying with the political parties that bought into the bait that this is possible to be executed post facto. So he has no intention of introducing a taxation bill that amends the.
Okay, unfortunately, we've run out of time now, but let's wait and see how the High Court is going to rule on that application that you've brought alongside the Democratic Alliance as well. Sinawo Thambo is the spokesperson for the